Hello, today we're going to talk about weight and balance, at least the specific definitions that pertain to weight and balance. Good book to follow along with today be the Rotorcraft Flying Handbook, Chapter 7. You can follow along if you like. First definition I'd like to talk about is basic empty weight. It's basically the starting point for our helicopter. It includes the weight of the standard helicopter, optional equipment, unusable fuel, and full operating fluids, including full oil. Now, the old days, still there's some old helicopters out there that still use licensed empty weight, and it's basically similar to the basic empty weight, except that it doesn't include the full engine oil weight. So you got to take that into consideration. The next term I'd like to talk about is useful load. What is useful load? The useful load is the difference between the gross weight and the basic empty weight. Gross weight is basically the total, the sum of the basic empty weight and its useful load. So those are terms that we'll use basically throughout your career as a helicopter pilot, so you need to get familiar with those, and like I said, they're in Chapter 7 here. Another term I'd like to mention is maximum gross weight. Anytime you hear the word maximum, that's the limits right there, basically, and maximum gross weight is just that, the maximum weight of the helicopter. Now keep in mind also that helicopters have an internal weight and an external weight. So an internal actual weight of the helicopter and an external, and this particularly relates to external loads. Next term I'd like to talk about is datum. And what datum is it's basically an imaginary line. It's established by the manufacturer, and it can be placed pretty much anywhere. It can be placed in front of the helicopter, it can be placed out here, it can be placed in the nose of the helicopter, it can be placed in the mast, but typically they set them out in front of the helicopter. That way the numbers that we deal with when we happen to do weight and balance, so that they're positive numbers, basically. So by definition, it's imaginary vertical planar point arbitrarily fixed somewhere along the longitudinal axis of the helicopter, from which all horizontal distances are measured for weight and balance purposes. And like I said, they can be located anywhere, so keep that in mind. Now that's the longitudinal one. Now for helicopters, we have a lateral one as well. And so when you're looking at the helicopter like this, I'll consider this the pilot side. I always say that the pilot side is the right side, or the positive side. So the lateral CG, or I should say lateral, the numbers on this side are actually positive. Let's put it that way. And the numbers on this side will be negative. So keep that in mind. Lateral will come into effect when you do weight and balance, unlike fixed wing. And the lateral datum is usually, in most helicopters, is usually located at the center of the helicopter. And the POH will actually define where that is, so with that information you can reference the POH. Next definition term I'd like to go over with you is arm. Now what arm is the horizontal distance from the datum to any component of the helicopter to any object located within the helicopter. So for example, the pilot's seat, let's say in the R-22, sits at 78 inches. So it's out here, it's basically 78 inches from that datum. So that'll come in handy when we do weight and balance, because we'll learn later that weight times arm equals moment, and total moments and total weights is how we get our CG, or center of gravity. So that kind of brings us into the next term, which is moment, which I've already talked about. It's the weight of an object. If the weight of an object is multiplied by its arm, the result is its moment. So if we take the pilot's weight, let's say 160 pounds sitting here at 78 inches, multiply that out, and that'll give us that moment for where that pilot is sitting, for that person in that spot. I mentioned center of gravity already, so let's talk a little bit about that. Center of gravity, it's a theoretical point where all the aircraft's weight is considered to be concentrated. And as we fly, the center of gravity, it moves, it changes. So before every flight, we do a weight and balance. We do it with fuel and without fuel, so that we can figure the fuel burn, because the CG moves as the fuel burns as well. So back to what I had said before, mentioned was that you divide the total moments by the total weights to actually get the center of gravity, and then once we do that, we can see if our center of gravity is within the limits. Today's lesson is pretty short. It's basically just covering some basic terms that will transition us into the next lesson, which will be weight and balance determinations and weight and balance management. So go ahead and read over Chapter 7, get familiar with that, and we'll continue on with the next lesson with the determinations. See you then.